I was elbow deep in a broken stage display made from cheap plastic pipes and false promises when I realized I had not eaten in 17 hours. The volunteers had mutinied over the missing appetizers, and Owen, our front desk coordinator, was looking at me like he was about to burst into tears. Meanwhile, I was hot gluing fake orchids to a cardboard column and whispering words of encouragement to myself. The annual Arts Gala was only 6 hours away. The sound engineer had just quit via a group text message, and the executive director of our nonprofit, Bradley Cole, was across town getting a manicure and practicing his speech in front of a ring light. I had given 4 years of my life to this crumbling arts nonprofit, saving it repeatedly with duct tape, sheer willpower, and my own personal credit card. I once paid our entire December payroll out of my own pocket because a donor check bounced and the board members were too busy skiing in Aspen to care. I had negotiated venue contracts, begged local printers to run materials overnight, and taught myself financial accounting during a thunderstorm in a flooded basement. I had smiled through years of backhanded praise from board members who called me dependable, which is boardroom code for someone they can exploit without ever having to promote. Bradley never noticed the systems I built to keep us afloat. He just showed up with his smug posturing, trying to ride our new corporate partnership with Stratacore Logistics like a pony at a county fair. His emails were filled with buzzwords about leveraging momentum and circling back, but when it came time to draft actual grant proposals or soothe angry local artists, he was nowhere to be found. The board members thought Bradley was charming. One of them once told me that Bradley had presence, sipping Prosecco as if that word meant anything. This was the same man who once introduced our classical ballet performers from Europe as a funky modern dance collective. Still, I kept showing up because I cared about the community programs. I was the one who actually ran the operations, and the artists, the stagehands, and the interns all knew it, but playing the good soldier had taken a heavy toll on my health and my sanity, and I was finally ready to move on. I had drafted my resignation letter late one night on my laptop after mopping dirty paint water off the lobby floor. It was a simple, dignified note thanking them for the opportunity and stating that my final day would be October 15th, immediately following the gala. I had not sent it yet. I wanted to see this final project through to completion. I wanted to leave on a high note, with my head held high and my dignity intact. I had not told anyone, not even Owen, who was busy sorting through registration badges. I simply saved the document in a folder on my laptop and returned to my tasks. This gala was my final masterpiece. I had planned every detail, from the stage lighting to the custom programs, and even the vegan menu options. The absolute highlight of the night was a $2 million partnership check from Stratacore Logistics. It was a relationship I had cultivated over 12 long months of corporate meetings, presentations, and detailed budget reviews. Bradley was already planning how to name a new theater wing after himself, walking into rehearsals with dark sunglasses and a latte. He nodded at me and demanded that I ensure his name was prominently featured in the introductory speech. I stared at him for a long moment, then quietly agreed. That was the moment I realized the fog in my head had cleared. This job and this toxic environment were no longer my world. I had outgrown this place, and my loyalty was no longer a virtue. It was just self-inflicted misery in a tailored suit. I showed up early the next morning in a sharp suit with my clipboard, reciting silent prayers that our vendors would actually deliver on time. I sat in our tiny storage closet, which doubled as my office, sipping instant coffee from a chipped mug while reviewing the final table assignments. The irony was hard to ignore. I had mapped out this entire evening down to the very minute, color-coding every donor interaction and building contingency plans for every possible disaster. The only thing I had not planned for was how it would feel to finally walk away. My plan was to get through the night, smile for the cameras, shake every hand in the ballroom, and then slip away quietly like a ghost. I would leave my office keys in a labeled envelope and start a new chapter of my life. I was halfway through organizing the registration badges when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Oliver from Stratacore Logistics, our primary contact and the only corporate manager who had ever treated me with genuine, professional respect during our monthly meetings. His text message was a brief check-in, asking me to meet their team near the main stage for a final walkthrough of the presentation. I put on my blazer, ditched my coffee mug, and walked down the long corridor toward the main ballroom. The walk gave me a moment to look over the venue. The grand space was quiet now, but soon it would be packed with hundreds of wealthy patrons. I recalled how I had spent the previous weekend cleaning the heavy crystal chandeliers myself, because Bradley had refused to allocate funds for professional cleaning, calling it a minor detail that no one would notice. I had climbed a 20-foot ladder in the empty room, wiping away years of dust while Bradley was busy posting about leadership on his social media accounts. Oliver was waiting for me near the stage, accompanied by his supervisor, Diana, and a third person I had never met before. He was a younger executive who carried himself with the calm, quiet confidence of someone who never had to raise his voice to command a room. He introduced himself as Felix, and he smiled at me as if he already knew my entire career history. Oliver gestured toward me as I approached, introducing me as the person who single-handedly kept the entire operation from falling apart. Diana shook my hand firmly, telling me that my hard work had made their funding decision very easy. I thanked her, feeling a bit surprised by the warmth of her praise. Oliver smiled and remarked that they had attended 5 different charity events this season, and ours was the only one that felt organized and professional. He credited my tight management of the logistics for their continued support, noting that they had noticed my attention to detail in every single report. Felix then leaned in and mentioned that a major community engagement project was coming down from their corporate office next quarter. He explained that Stratacore wanted to move away from standard corporate sponsorships that felt like simple tax write-offs and transition toward initiatives that created real, measurable community impact. They were looking for a capable leader who could execute a strategic vision rather than just talk about it in meetings. He asked about my operational philosophy, and I explained how I focused on lean budgeting, transparent reporting, and treating our community artists as partners rather than commodities. He listened intently, asking specific questions about how I had managed our vendor logistics during a previous shipping crisis when our staging materials were delayed at the port. He looked me in the eye and asked if I would be open to a consulting role to lead the new initiative. I felt a sudden sense of relief wash over me. It was not excitement or panic, but rather the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted from my shoulders. It was the first time in years that someone had acknowledged my value without expecting me to clean up after them first. It felt as if someone had opened a window in a room I did not realize was sealed shut. I kept my composure, smiling politely and saying that I would be happy to discuss the details once the gala was successfully completed. Diana agreed, saying they would follow up with me early next week. As they walked away to discuss lighting angles with the stage crew, I stood there holding my clipboard, my heart racing with a feeling of hope I had not felt in a very long time. This was not just a job offer. It was a validation of my skills and a chance to build something significant, without having to beg for resources or fight for recognition. It was a door opening to a new career path, and I was determined to walk through it. I decided to keep the offer entirely to myself for the time being. I did not mention it to Owen or any of the other staff members. I wanted my departure to be handled with absolute precision and professionalism. I was not going to risk ruining this opportunity after 4 years of enduring Bradley's incompetence. I would let Bradley have his moment in the spotlight tonight, knowing that the stage was already being set for something much bigger. I just had to get through this one final evening. The ballroom doors opened right on schedule, and the guests began to stream in. The room looked beautiful, illuminated by a warm amber light that made even the coldest board members look approachable. The tables were set perfectly, decorated with centerpieces I had personally arranged after our florist failed to show up. The massive Stratacore Logistics banner hung straight and proud above the stage, a result of my own efforts climbing a tall ladder earlier that afternoon while Bradley was resting in the dressing room. Everything was moving according to plan, and I was only a few hours away from my quiet exit. The event was running smoothly, and the silent auction had already surpassed our fundraising goals from the previous year. I was standing near the back of the room, checking off the final tasks on my list, when Bradley finally entered the ballroom. He was 40 minutes late, his face flushed, and his breathing heavily scented with mints. He wore a loud blazer with a pocket square that looked entirely out of place, and he carried himself with the empty confidence of a man who had done none of the work but expected all the praise. He walked straight to the master of ceremonies, whispered something in his ear, and pointed toward the stage. I watched him approach several major donors at the front tables, offering them exaggerated handshakes and laughing loudly at his own jokes. He stopped by the VIP table to greet the chief executive officer of Stratacore Logistics, Maxwell Pierce, who gave him a polite but distant nod, clearly preferring to scan the room for our operational team. Owen caught my eye from across the room and raised his eyebrows, asking silently if I wanted him to intervene. I shook my head, silently signaling him to let Bradley proceed. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone and introduced Bradley to the crowd. A polite round of applause filled the room as Bradley took the stage. He held the microphone too close, starting with a rehearsed joke about charity events that received a few polite chuckles from the front tables. Then, he transitioned into his main speech, talking about the importance of community support and how Stratacore Logistics had recognized the value of our organization. He spoke as if the partnership were a personal achievement, ignoring the months of work I had put into securing the agreement. He talked about vision and leadership, claiming credit for the strategic alignment that I had drafted while sitting on a metal folding chair in our basement storage room. I stood in the shadows near the entrance, my face neutral, refusing to let my frustration show. When Bradley finally finished his speech and stepped down, I offered him a polite nod as I prepared for my own segment. It was my job to present the ceremonial $2 million check on stage alongside the Stratacore executives. I walked up the wooden steps, holding the large foam board in one hand and my phone in the other, which I used to reference my presentation notes. The check was beautifully printed, representing a year of my life, spent writing proposals, tracking metrics, and building trust. The stage lights were hot and bright, and the photographer took his position at the center aisle. The room grew quiet. I smiled for the cameras, ready to hand over the check and complete my final duty. That was when my phone vibrated in my palm. I glanced down at the screen, expecting a last-minute schedule update from Owen regarding the catering service. Instead, I saw a text message from Bradley. It contained only 3 lowercase words and a smiley face. "You are fired." I stood frozen under the hot stage lights for a brief second, feeling the sheer absurdity of the moment wash over me. I looked at Bradley, who was standing near the edge of the stage, holding a glass of wine and smiling at me with a smug look of satisfaction. A calm determination settled over me. I leaned in close to the microphone, held up my phone so the audience could see the screen, and announced clearly to the silent room that I had just received a text message from our executive director informing me that I was terminated. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned silence. The background music stopped, and a glass dropped somewhere near the bar, shattering on the tile floor. In the silence, a loud voice boomed from the front table, demanding to know who had made the decision to terminate my employment. It was Maxwell Pierce, the chief executive officer of Stratacore Logistics, who stood up slowly from his seat. Bradley turned pale, his wineglass trembling in his hand. I did not say another word. I carefully placed the giant foam check onto its presentation stand, stepped down from the stage, and walked calmly back to my seat. I sat down, crossed my legs, and took a sip of water, watching the chaos unfold. Bradley had started a fire, but he did not realize that I had already built the exits. The silence in the room was deafening, followed quickly by a wave of urgent whispers that spread through the crowd of 300 guests. The board members sat frozen in shock, their faces pale and their eyes wide. Walter, our board chair, was frantically typing on his phone, trying to manage the public relations disaster unfolding in real time. As I made my way out of the venue and returned home, I felt a deep sense of clarity. The cool night air was a welcome contrast to the tense atmosphere of the ballroom. I took off my suit, made a cup of hot tea, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. The blue light from the screen illuminated the quiet room as I began compiling the evidence I had gathered over the past 4 years. I had kept detailed records of everything, including every unpaid expense, late payroll distribution, and email correspondence. I methodically went through every folder, matching dates, cross-referencing credit card statements, and typing up a detailed timeline of Bradley's operational errors. By the time the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, my eyes were burning, but I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and clarity. I knew that the board would try to protect Bradley, and I needed to ensure my documentation was absolute and organized. Throughout the night and into the early hours of the morning, my phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues and local artists who had witnessed the event. Nora, a curator who had worked with us on several community exhibitions, sent a long message expressing her solidarity and stating she was ready to boycott the center. Even a few of our regular volunteers texted to say they would not return unless I was reinstated. Owen sent me updates from the venue, describing how Bradley had spent the rest of the evening huddled in a corner with Walter, trying to draft a public relations statement while the remaining sponsors quietly left the building. Bradley was apparently telling everyone that my onstage announcement was just a childish prank, but none of the donors were buying his explanation. The next morning, the consequences of Bradley's public blunder began to unfold. Stratacor Logistics sent a formal letter to the board of directors suspending their $2 million funding commitment, citing concerns over organizational leadership and financial transparency. Two other major corporate sponsors followed their lead within hours, withdrawing their financial support and demanding a full investigation into the incident. By Tuesday afternoon, Walter, the board chair, contacted me to request an urgent meeting at a quiet restaurant. He was accompanied by two other board members, Quincy and Brenda. They looked exhausted and anxious, their reputations on the line as the local news began to report on the Gala incident. The coffee on the table grew cold as I spoke. I walked them through each document slowly, ensuring they understood how deeply Bradley's mismanagement had compromised the entire board's legal standing. I pointed out that as board members, they had a fiduciary duty to supervise the executive director, and ignoring these warning signs could make them personally liable in a lawsuit. I showed them the records of late payroll payments, including the month I had to fund the payroll myself to keep the staff from quitting. I showed them receipts for personal expenses that Bradley had charged to the organization's accounts, including expensive dinners and personal trips. But the most significant document was a copy of the final contract addendum with Stratacor Logistics. I pointed out the signature on the document. It was my name, but I had never signed it. Bradley had forged my signature to meet the contract deadline after neglecting the project for weeks. He had signed my name on a financial compliance report certifying that all previous grant money had been spent on authorized programs, when in fact he had diverted $50,000 to a personal marketing consultant. I explained the legal implications of this action. Under California Penal Code Section 470, forging a signature on a financial agreement is a serious criminal offense. Because the signature was forged, the contract itself was void from the beginning, a legal doctrine known as void ab initio. This meant that Stratacor Logistics was under no legal obligation to honor the $2 million funding commitment, and the nonprofit had no legal recourse to enforce it. Furthermore, I explained that Bradley's decision to terminate my employment immediately after I raised concerns about these financial discrepancies constituted a clear violation of California Labor Section 1102.5. This statute protects employees from whistleblower retaliation, and any attempt to terminate an employee for reporting illegal activity carries heavy civil penalties and statutory damages. Walter and the other board members sat in stunned silence as they processed the information. They realized that Bradley's actions had not only cost them their largest corporate sponsor, but had also exposed the entire organization to massive legal liabilities and potential criminal charges. Quincy admitted that they had ignored the warning signs for far too long, and Brenda asked if I would be willing to present this evidence to the full board during an emergency review session. I told them I would cooperate with their legal team, provided they took immediate steps to address the systemic corruption within the executive leadership. By the end of the week, the situation escalated further. Bradley attempted to defend himself by sending a long, rambling email to the entire staff and board, accusing me of orchestrating a malicious campaign to sabotage the organization. He claimed my public announcement at the Gala was a planned performance designed to damage their reputation. Within hours, the local media picked up the story, publishing articles about the internal conflicts shaking the Arts Center. The local newspaper, the Downtown Herald, ran a front-page story questioning whether the Arts Collective could survive the sudden withdrawal of its primary corporate backers. The newspapers did not stop there. A local arts blog published a long editorial analyzing the power dynamics of arts administration, using our organization as a prime example of why founders and operational leaders should be protected from arbitrary dismissals by executive directors who hold titles but do no work. The board responded by blocking my access to the nonprofit's email servers and shared network drives. And they even removed my name and photograph from the organization's website. They sent a formal cease and desist letter to my home, claiming I had violated a non-disparagement agreement by speaking publicly about the termination. I was not concerned. I knew they would try to erase my digital footprint. I had watched Bradley do it to other staffers who had left under tense circumstances. That was why I had spent my weekend copying every folder, every spreadsheet, and every contract from the corporate drive to my personal encrypted cloud account. By the time they revoked my credentials, there was nothing left for them to delete. Owen had called me earlier that afternoon to warn me that our IT department had been instructed to delete my files and wipe the hard drive of my office desktop. I told him not to worry, as I had already secured the documentation. That evening, I received a text message from Maxwell Pierce, the Chief Executive Officer of Stratacore Logistics, asking to meet for dinner to discuss a professional proposal. We met the following night at a quiet table in the corner of a local restaurant. Maxwell did not waste time with small talk. He told me that Stratacore had officially terminated its relationship with the Downtown Arts Collective due to the forged contract and the clear evidence of financial mismanagement. He then offered me a position to lead a brand new cultural outreach initiative directly funded by Stratacore Logistics. It would be an independent program with a substantial budget of $6 million, designed to support local artists and community projects without the bureaucratic interference of a corrupt board. He told me that they wanted a builder who could manage the operations with integrity and skill. We would hire Owen as our operations director, ensuring that our systems were run by people who actually understood the work. Maxwell Pierce watched me as I spoke, noting that he had worked with dozens of administrators over his career, but very few who possessed both the strategic foresight and the operational grit to stand their ground. He explained that Stratacore wanted to make a clean break from the past, and that partnering with the Vance Collective was the most logical step to ensure their corporate social responsibility goals were met. I accepted the offer, and we launched the Vance Collective the following month. We focused on real strategy, transparent operations, and direct community impact. Many of the local artists and community organizers who had worked with me at the nonprofit immediately transitioned to our new program, leaving the Downtown Arts Collective with no staff and no programs. Without our operational team, their programs collapsed, and the board was forced to dissolve the organization. Within weeks, the old Arts Center was completely empty. The classrooms where we once held community workshops were silent, and the gallery walls remained bare. It was a stark reminder that an organization is defined by its people, not its name on a letterhead. 1 year later, I was standing in a beautiful new ballroom, hosting the inaugural gala for Stratacore Outreach, Incorporated. The room was filled with supporters, artists, and corporate sponsors, and the atmosphere was one of genuine celebration. The digital backdrops displayed pictures of the community mural projects and youth theater programs we had successfully funded over the past 12 months. I was now the chairperson of a thriving community arts fund, managing a budget 3 times larger than the one I had left behind. Walter, the former board chair of the now-defunct Downtown Arts Collective, attended the event. He approached me near the stage, looking older and tired. He looked at the room and admitted that they should have listened to my warnings before the organization collapsed. I offered him a polite smile and remarked that some lessons are only learned after the damage is already done. I walked onto the stage to deliver the opening remarks. The applause from the audience was warm and genuine, recognizing the work we had done to build a lasting program. I stood at the microphone, looking out at the crowd of 400 people, and began the presentation. The team that had tried to silence me was gone, and the initiative they had tried to destroy was now stronger than ever. I had not sought revenge through anger or destruction. I had simply used the law to hold them accountable, and in doing so, I had built a better foundation for the future.